Anyway, I'm excited for this morning, and let me ask the Lord to bless our time, and then I'll introduce our speaker for the day. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you that you made it, and you designed it, and you anticipated that each one of us would hear something from a brother next to us or from our guest that will be wisdom for us. Lord, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you that it walks. Thank you that it works wherever it goes. And we pray that our ears will be open to your Spirit to prompt us in ways that we can use what we hear today to be salt and light where we go. Thank you for your presence. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, this series, as you know, is called Shine, Light at Work. You have a card on your table. Here's our memory verse. You probably don't know this one. It's not a real familiar one, but what a great verse this is. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and the one who waters will himself be watered. Almost every industry book written about leadership somehow says this, but usually without biblical authority. And now you have biblical authority for being the guy you need to be at work. Our world is a mess. Our politics are in chaos. What can we do about this? Well, we really don't know a whole lot, except we can walk in wisdom into our day-to-day and do the things that God prompts us to do. My friend Kent Myers is coming to speak to us today, and he is a business consultant. I really don't know what he does. I've known him for 25 years. I think it's legal, and but he constantly is coaching teams and makes a living at this, but you're going to get what he has to say for free, a condensed version, so listen up. Kent's a good friend. We've done some biking adventures. We've built some things together, lots of misadventures we've had together, and just a good friend of mine. So I'm really grateful that Kent can come and be with us. So Kent, my brother, where'd you go? Kent Myers. By the way, he is the owner of the man barn that we use in the summertime. It's really my barn. I loan it to him, and I use it whenever I need it.
I was going to say, you put as much work into it as I have, I think.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for being with us this
morning.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting me be here today, Roger. Well, good morning. I hope everybody's thawed out after these last couple of days that we've endured and been through. Roger asked me to talk a little bit about what I do, but also kind of a subject that I'm passionate about, and I get an opportunity to spend time with a lot of different teams, a lot of different corporate teams across the nation to be able to talk about, and that topic is accountability. You know, one of those times we walk into organizations, there's always two things that we hear are broken. Any guesses as to what they are? Accountability, obviously. What's the other one? Communication. And it's always interesting to hear those two things and whether it's lack of or inconsistency of. And that's really what we're going to talk a little bit about today, because some of those things are, I heard the word trust, create trust in organizations, which is really foundational for most teams. Well, I get as Roger asked me to talk a little bit about myself, I think I showed up at Berean about 6 months after Roger did. I guess my wife and I are going on our 28th year here at Berean. And have seen Roger through his tenure, and as he talked about, we've become great friends and had a lot of adventures and misadventures together. I get an opportunity with what I do to walk into organizations and solve problems in a lot of cases, and those problems are usually because problems or opportunities, either way that you look at them, are because change is going on. And that's either change that there is tremendous growth going on in an organization and the wheels are shaking and about ready to fall off because things are moving so fast, or that things aren't going so well. And sometimes there's just a realignment of direction that needs to happen. Or sometimes there's transition that's going on. And through acquisitions or mergers of some type, that there's change that's happening in an organization. And anytime there's change and people are impacted, there's emotions. And one of the things that I will probably share with you today as we talk about accountability, that's a key word during change and through accountability, is the word caring that I want to talk about. Because at the end of the day, these aren't operations that we're dealing with. These are people that we're dealing with. So I want to talk a little bit about that today, accountability and what role that we as leaders play in that, and what that means and what it doesn't mean in some cases as we talk through that. But You used the word, Roger, as you were introducing this today, leadership, several times of some things that are coming up. And that's usually one of those topics that I get a chance to venture into in a lot of organizations because the people that I work with are kind of the hierarchical leaders of the organization, if we think of leadership that way. So let me start with a pretty simple question. How many of you, without any hesitation, unequivocally, would call yourself a leader? Raise your hand. I bet I've asked that question hundreds of times in front of audiences, and it's about the same response, somewhere between 30 and 40% of the hands that go up. And of those 30 and 40%, it's usually like this. I'm amazed by that because I think sometimes what we've done is we've turned this term leader or leadership into something that is heroic, something that is just every once in a while, something that happens that only few of us get a chance to ever participate in or ever to be a part of. And I hope if you don't take anything else away from today, that you understand that that isn't the case, that every single one of you are leaders. As I get the opportunity to teach in a couple of universities and walk into organizations, one of the things I like to do is kind of put a stake in the ground and say, let's talk about what leadership really is. And I've kind of come to this definition, is the term of everyday leader. And we'll talk a little bit about that means, because it's not leader when the merger is going on or when the big project is happening or when there's something catastrophic, some catastrophic event that's going on. Leadership, real leadership, happens in the little things every single day. So we'll use this as a kind of foundation as we talk about today. An everyday leader is a person who thinks more about the needs of others than themselves, speaks with integrity, acts with purpose, consistently impacting the lives of others every single day. You know, when you think about that word leadership, what are some of the first words that come to your mind? Servant. Very good. What else? Vision. Very good. What else? Risk. Absolutely. Willing to take risk. A couple more. Communication. Good communication. There's another one. Courage. Sacrifice. Influence. That is a great word. So let me ask one more question. When you think of that word leader or that word leadership, who do you think of first? Roger Thompson. Thanks for that answer, Roger. I appreciate that. Who else? Who else do you think of? Donald Trump. I hear that question quite often. Not just the person, but the position. Maybe people will say the president or a general. People of hierarchical influence. Well, I want to talk maybe about a different type of leadership, this type of leadership, because this type of leadership has no hierarchy. This isn't talking about power or authority. As a matter of fact, if you ask me this question, who would I think of when I think about what a leader is, I would tell you this person. Does everybody know who that is? Well, unless your car broke down in the little town of Boonville, Missouri, you probably would have no idea who that person is. The little town I grew up in, right in the middle of Missouri, I had the opportunity between my freshman and my sophomore year in college to have one of the greatest jobs I've ever had in my entire life. I was an umpire for a 5- and 6-year-old T-ball league. Yeah, I see many people have been through 5- and 6-year-old T-ball. You know the leadership lessons that I learned in going through a position like that. But I joke about that, but probably one of the greatest memories I have about the exemplification of leadership was through that job. And it was by the meeting of this individual, Larry Schuster. And I'll just tell you the story. Is those of you that know how 5- and 6-year-old T-ball work, you know that there's rarely a scoreboard, and there wasn't in this case. Nobody's keeping score officially, but everybody's kind of watching and knowing what the score is. You also know, if you know 5- and 6-year-old T-ball, that the way it works isn't kind of 3 strikes and you're out in most cases. or 3 outs an inning. Most of the time that doesn't happen, and you bat all the way around the order, and then it's the next team's turn to bat. So my job was really kind of a glorified timekeeper, because I would watch each team go back and forth. I'd keep track of the batters, and then when time was just about up, the game was over. And this was one of those nights in July in Missouri when it's really hot and really dusty that we were approaching near the end of the game. And I could tell it was the last batter that was coming up for this team, and there wasn't that much time left, that was probably going to be the night. And this little boy comes up, and as I mentioned, most times there isn't strikeouts or outs within T-ball, but in this case there was. This young boy had been up a couple of times that night and had struck out twice. This young boy suffered from Down syndrome, so he didn't have a tremendous amount of muscle control. And he came up to the plate, and his coach came down from the first base line and gets him set up, gets his feet spread apart a little bit, and helps him put his bat up. And I do my job of putting the ball on the tee, and this little boy swings as hard as he can, smacks the tee, and the ball falls backwards, and it's strike one. And you could really tell from the parents that they kind of knew what was coming a little bit, and you could see the lawn chairs starting to get packed up, and things started to get gathered together. Coach comes over again, sets him back up a little bit, sets his feet apart, gets his bat back up, and I set the ball on the tee again, and he swings as hard as he can, smacks the tee, and the ball falls forward, right in front of home plate. There aren't a lot of experts on all of the rules of T-ball, so there was a moment of silence that happened right there. And I didn't know exactly what to do, and I'm kind of looking at the ball, and all of a sudden, out of the opposing team's dugout, you hear this voice scream, "Run to first, run to first, run to first!" And the little boy looks back at me, so I give him the universal sign of run to first. And he actually ran to first base, which is actually a challenge for some that run to third base as soon as they hit the ball. But he took off toward first base as hard as he could go. This voice was getting louder, run to first, run to first, run to first. Boy's halfway to first base. And that voice changes, throw the ball to first, throw the ball to first. If any of you understand the athletic ability of a 5-year-old catcher to make the throw from home plate to first base, you kind of know what happens. This ball ends up in the right field fence. At this point, Larry Schuster, the opposing team's coach, is in the box at first base with the team's coach, shooing this boy around first base as hard as he could go. Run to second, run to second. He's almost all the way around second base when the boys finally get to the ball and he's yelling at his boys to throw the ball to second base. You see what happens. In that little town in the middle of Missouri on that little field, this boy hits an inside the park home run. And you would have thought it was the 7th game of the World Series that just occurred, because the place went crazy. It didn't matter who was parent for who, or what family people belonged to, or what team people were on. The whole place went crazy. And I get choked up thinking about that, because being there in that moment, it was really one of those great moments in life that sink into your head. And it was always a good story when I told that story, but about 3 years ago, it'll be 3 years in June, Larry Schuster passed away. And I was having a conversation one night with my mom and my dad when I was calling home, and Mom was saying we went to Larry Schuster's funeral. And she said, you'd be interested. There was a gentleman, a young man at that point, that stood up and gave his eulogy. The young man at that point was a senior vice president for Special Olympics. And the story that he got up and told was the night that Larry Schuster, in one moment, changed the trajectory of his life. Because he cared enough to come out of the dugout. And when I talk about that kind of leadership, that title of leadership, that definition of leadership, that's the thing that I'm talking about. Larry Schuster wasn't in a position of hierarchy or authority or even very little influence unless your car was really broken. But in that level of kindness, in that moment of kindness, in that one night, changed the trajectory of a young boy's life, changed his perception of himself, and as he talked about that, made them the man that he was at that point. And if you think about that, the ripple effect that might have in that legacy of what that young boy will go on to do to change the perspective, and the trajectory of other people's lives. Well, as we talk about accountability today, I want you to think about that kind of leadership. Not the kind of leadership that is hierarchical, presidential, but that kind of leadership that is out of caring and out of serving others and out of integrity and out of purpose. Well, as I mentioned when we started, I wanted to spend some time talking about accountability. One of those struggles that exists in most organizations, one of those pain points. And the topic I want to talk about today is accountability. We understand hierarchical accountability when the boss holds staff accountable, when a parent holds a child accountable. We understand that kind of hierarchical accountability, but I want to talk about a couple other kinds. Probably one that will resonate very well here today, and that's peer accountability. But I also want to talk about self-accountability. Let's start with hierarchical accountability, because we as people of influence, and I say that in terms of leadership, that's not necessarily hierarchical, we are in positions where we need to hold accountability to children, sometimes to parents, sometimes to staff, but we are in a role we have to do that. And the way I want you to think about that is, what really is those moments where we have to talk about accountability? And it's pretty simple. There's a lot of ways we can think about it, but it really comes into play in most cases where we expect something and something happens that creates a gap. Not what we expected. A behavior, a timeline, a budget, a conversation. Whatever those things are, we expect something, whether our expectations are right or not, and then something else happens that in most cases falls short of that, creates an opportunity for accountability. Well, that's reactive accountability, when something has happened. I want to talk to you today about, as leaders, about how to be proactive to never get to the gap in which we have to have these conversations. And I want to kind of address it and thinking about it in 4 different boxes. What your role is as a leader. Role number 1 is to be unbelievably clear about what your expectations are. Now, it's funny because in every single one of these boxes and every one of these we go through, there's traps that we as leaders and we as men fall into. The trap we fall into with that first box is they should just know what's expected of them. That's part of their job. It's in their job description. It's in the relationship we have. It's with your wife. We've talked about this before. Those words resonate in any of your homes that happens? I get told that a lot. We've talked about this before. Doesn't mean that it's understood and it's heard. So we have to be very clear when we need something done, when we want something done, when we're working on something together, that we verbalize and are clear about what we expect. First role that we have as leaders, being very clear about expectations, not falling into the trap. They should just know that. Number 2, investment. We think about this with our kids. We think about this in our workplaces, is that we have to invest in those people to make sure they have all of the knowledge and skills and capabilities to be able to meet those expectations. So we have to be extremely clear about what investment is needed. It may be coaching. It might be showing them how to do something before you expect them to do it. It might be some education that they need. It might mean a peer that they need to help them along the way to model some things for them. It could be a lot of things. The trap we as leaders fall into here is they'll figure it out, or if they need something and don't understand it, they'll come find us and ask us questions and ask for those things that they need. It's a trap we fall into because in most cases, people are nervous about that. They want to please you. And they aren't comfortable in coming to ask, so they do the very best they can until something has failed. Number 3, we have to be very clear about the consequences. And I don't mean that in the workplace of do this right, or there's performance improvement plans going to be put in place, or terminations, or those. That's not the kind of consequences I'm talking about. People have to understand the impact, the why you're asking them to do something, and the impact that it has. In our workplaces, a lot of cases we find that one task leads to another. One person's role is just part of a process into another person's role. But few people understand, except for maybe that leader that's asking things, how all the puzzle pieces fit together. So what happens in life? We get busy. We're asked by a lot of people to do a lot of different things. And if we don't understand the consequences of timelines or criticality of how important it is, or the importance of the quality, because if it isn't perfect, the next step is going to fail. If people don't understand that, they might assume some things. They might have assumed that can probably slide. That's not as important as this other thing that someone's asking of me. I can nudge it a day when maybe it can't. Or that's close enough. I know we're all in a hurry. That quality is close enough. I'll let it go and somebody will fix it downstream and somebody might get hurt, or a process might get broken, or consequences may occur. As leaders, we have to create great clarity around the impact that has, the consequences that what we're asking of has. People need to understand why, to really be able to engage and to hold themselves accountable and accomplish some of these things. So the three pieces so far is we have to be extremely clear about what we expect. We have to be extremely clear about what they need to be successful and invest in them. And we have to be extremely clear what the impacts or the consequences are. And the last thing I'll tell you is we have to watch and support and monitor and make sure that progress is being made. The trap we fall into there is, I told them when it needed to be done. I told them what needed to be done. If it's not going to be done on time, I'm sure that they'll come tell me. Well, what really happens in our real lives? In our families or in our workplaces, we ask for something, we think that they're fully equipped to be able to do that, and we find out the day before, or the hour before, or the moment of, something's not going to happen. Or budgets, quality, timeline, whatever those things are, we didn't meet the mark. And by that time, it's too late for us to react. And our gap is formed. And we get into those difficult discussions. To avoid those, we have to monitor and ask. Now, I am not talking about micromanaging, either our families or our workplaces. That's not what I'm talking about. Because micromanagement is, are you done? 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 Are you going to be on time? What I'm talking about is going back to our previous conversations of, how's it coming? What more can I do to support you? What other help might you need to be successful? We monitor because we care, not because we're micromanaging. And when people know that, a lot of the other components of fear, of missed timelines, fear of asking for help, fear of not being clear on expectations goes away, because trust begins to be built. Relationships begin to be built. And if we think back in our lives, some of the best leaders we've had the chance to work with, they've done these things. They've supported us, not managed us. And that's a big difference in our workplaces and in our families and in every single one of our relationships when we think about things from that perspective. Well, that's hierarchical accountability, and I think we all understand that a little bit. So I want to talk about the other two types of accountability, the first one being peer. And I actually can't imagine that there is a greater type of accountability that resonates more in this room than this Ironworks group. Because if we think about peer accountability, straight from Proverbs, as iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. And Philippians, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Peer accountability. Now, I'll tell you a little trick. Peer accountability, as I've found in organizations or groups or teams, is clearly the most impactful type of accountability. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so important and so impactful? Why is it in your relationships in this room? Absolutely, there's trust. You care. That's a great word because we're gonna actually dwell on that just a little bit. The other thing that I find, yeah.
There's also a common denominator of faith.
Absolutely, because you're on the same. There is a standard. There's a foundation of that level of accountability and the expectations that we have of each other because of our faith. Absolutely true. It's motivating. The other thing I find, though, is that peer accountability in most teams is the hardest thing to do. Would you agree with that? Why is that? Why is peer accountability so hard? It's competition. It's confrontation, competition, and ego. There's people that talk about, I have a great relationship. I don't want to damage that relationship by holding someone accountable. Those are all real things. But we also know it's most impactful. And the word that matters, it's not that do we want to or not, it's how do we hold peers accountable. And the word I want you to think about of how to hold peers accountable is the word that's already been said. When we hold peer accountability because we care, not because we're critical, life changes. When we hold someone accountable because we care about in the room the way that they came across, that they didn't understand, or the way that they behaved, that they may not have seen. One of the most difficult things that we have in our lives are the blind spots that we have that creates sometimes our bad behaviors. I am blind as a bat most of the time, and luckily I have a wife that is gracious in the way that cares about me enough to help hold me accountable to some of those things, and I have some great friends that do that as well. As we think about building great teams and the foundation of trust, we can't ignore the aspect of caring about each other so much that we hold each other accountable because we want each other to be successful. It changes our whole perspective when someone approaches us with that difficult conversation of, I just want you to know the way that you may have come across in that meeting that you may not be aware of. Or I need you to understand the impact of maybe a behavior that you have that is impacting other people. We're not saying those things because we want them to feel bad about themselves and we're critical of them. We say those things because we care about them as brothers and sisters and we want them to be successful and great examples. Peer accountability, one of the most powerful things that we can have within a team. And if you think back about some of the teams that you've been on, whether it be sporting teams or teams here at churches or work teams, you think about the way that you addressed each other, the way that you coached each other, the way that you held each other accountable wasn't out of criticism. The best coaches that you have coached you not out of criticism, they coached you out of caring. Peer accountability is the same thing. Well, the last kind of accountability I want to talk about is self-accountability. And I think we all understand that, especially from the faith background that we have of holding ourselves accountable. In organizations, this is one of those topics that is difficult to talk about. And I actually found a speaker that actually addresses this much better than I do. So I brought along a little video today that talks about this, and I think there's kind of a phrase within this that will resonate to you.
1998, Fortune magazine named a relatively unknown bank in Columbus, Georgia, Synovus Bank, the best company to work for in the United States. 57 consecutive quarters of double-digit profit growth, 15,000% growth in employees in 10 years from 1988 to 1998, a turnover rate 1/5 their industry average. So I'm intrigued. And they beat the pants off of all their major competitors in every market they're in. So I call up the CEO. I said, can I come and visit your bank? He says, yes. 3 months later, I'm sitting in his office in Columbus, Georgia. I said, Jimmy, before I meet anybody else in your bank, tell me, why is this the best company to work for in America? Why are you so successful? And I love it. In his strong Southern drawl, he said, John. He said, the secret of Synovus is the power of love. I said, Jimmy, I'm from up north. Could you say that again? He said, John, the secret of Synovus is the power of love. He said, you ask anybody in this bank why they love working here and why it's so great, they'll tell you it's love. He said, we love each other, we love the customers, we know each other's kids, each other's grandchildren. He said, one part of this company cries, the whole company cries with them. He said, you ask anybody the secret of this bank, they'll tell you, the power of love. Gave me a badge, set me loose. I'm wandering around the bank and asking people, what's the secret of the bank? They said, the power of love. What's the secret of the bank? The power of love. But everywhere I go, I saw these two numbers on the wall, 100/0. Now, at first I thought, now this is an honest bank. I mean, they put it right up front where you can see it. You give us 100% of your money, you get nothing in return. You know, they never laugh at TD at that. I don't know why, you know. Their customers laugh. I just don't know why they don't laugh. But it's obviously not it, because it's on badges, it's on walls, it's on desks. So finally I asked a teller in one of the branches, what's the 100/0? And she said, oh, that's easy. She said, the 100 stands for 100% responsibility. You never say it's not my job. You never say I'd have been on time if it wasn't for the traffic. You never say this would be a great company if the CEO would just do his or her job. 100% of the time, you take responsibility for the success of yourself and the success of this company. You know it's up to each one of us to keep this company great. She said, and the 0 stands for 0 excuses for not giving great service or great quality in every single interaction with every single person. There is never an excuse not to be your absolute best. I ran back to the CEO's office. I waited to see him. I said, Jimmy, wait a minute. You told me the secret of the bank's the power of love. What's with the 100/0 stuff? And I love it. He didn't even look up. He said, well, I forgot to tell you, it's tough love. But you know what? I think Jimmy Blanchard nailed it. He nailed it. If you want to create a highly engaged business, I would ask you right now, do you have those two things in your office? First of all, do you have the 100/0? We'll talk about the love in a minute. Do you have the 100/0? Do 100% of the people who work for you know what's expected of them? Do they know what you stand for? Do they know what you're shooting for in terms of the kind of experience that customers are supposed to have? Is there even one person on your team who is not a great ambassador for your business, that you are either coaching up or coaching out? And I'll tell you right now, if you want to do something to create engagement in your team, if you've got even one person in your business who is either in the wrong job for their skills or is simply not a good ambassador for your business, one of the best things you can do for your business is when you leave this room, make a commitment that you will either coach them up or you'll coach them out if they're not capable or willing to do that.
I know that's got a very business message to it, but think about 100/0 in our lives, in our teams, in our families. If we had a whole team where every single person practiced 100/0, including ourselves, that exemplify that in our leadership, how many issues would go away? How many emails would go away? How many arguments would go away? How many disagreements? How many hurt feelings? How many difficult conversations would go away? Because of that strong sense of self-accountability that we can trust each other. Well, I know one of the things that you do when you're spending time together on Wednesday nights and Friday mornings is address a couple of questions. And I want to do the same thing, but I want to kind of do it in a couple different exercises. So around your tables, I'd love for you to each take a moment. And I want you to think about some time where you were trying to accomplish something, asked to accomplish something, doing something, and something got in your way. I want you guys to share stories, if you would, for just a few minutes about what that moment was like. Tell a story of when you were trying to accomplish something and something got in your way. Just a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back and keep talking. Go ahead.
Excellent talk so far.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to have something where I could refer to that because it would help me.
Well, let's come back together just a little bit. It was interesting because I got the opportunity to walk around and I was just listening to some of the stories. And it's just like most of the stories I hear when I ask this question. Because I hear stories going on, well, my employee, or my boss, or the vendor, or the customer. And it's always something that got in our way is someone else, is something else. Is the complexion of those stories that we always hear. Well, I want you to take a peek at this slide. Everybody see that okay? What'd you see? Watermelon. What else did you see? Elvis Presley. Elvis always comes out. Soccer ball. There's a lot of things that are on that slide. My point is this, is that when we see things, we all see different things. There's things that resonate to us. There's things that we hear differently. There's things that we see differently. You know, it's the same situation when we're faced with conflict or we're faced with an obstacle. It is all about the way that we see it. And when it comes to accountability, there's two lenses that we can look through. We can either look through the victim lens, which is some of the stories that I was hearing. Things happened to me. Or we can look through the accountable lens, that 100-0 lens, that things happen because of me. So I want to shift gears on those conversations that you have. I want you to not just look through the victim's lens, but I want you to change your conversations for just a moment. And I want you to ask yourself some questions. Think about this a little bit differently. What things did I pretend not to know or fail to include in my story? What evidence or clues did I ignore? What things could I have done differently? What things did I learn the last time this happened to me that I could have applied this time? You can kind of read through some of the suggested questions. I want you guys to take a couple minutes. Rehab those same conversations, but I now want you to look through that obstacle that you faced through the accountability lens, not the victim lens. Asking yourself some of these questions. A couple minutes, readdress those same situations you just talked about. Let's come back together. How did the conversations change? I think over here at one of these tables, there's going to be some therapy that's going to be needed afterwards. I heard some significant grilling that was going on about one of the stories. How did they change? Humility. Kind of looking at ourselves and understanding what role we have in some of this. That's exactly what we think about when we think about accountability and this definition of leadership is caring enough to look at ourselves first and understanding what skin we have in the game of expectation setting, of equipping people, investing in people, of making sure that there's clarity around consequences and urgencies and necessity and why, but also then following up, making sure that progress is being made out of caring, not out of management, to be able to make sure that everyone is successful. Those things happen when we look at life, look at projects, look at families, look at situations through accountable lenses, not just victim lenses. Well, if you think about this, just like our attitudes and everything else, it's a decision that we make every morning that we wake up. Who will we be? What is our attitude? And how are we going to view the day? Accountability is the same way. If you look at that red line, that line in the middle, as a situation, something that's occurred, and I would imagine that by 8:15 this morning, one of those red lines will appear in most of our lives. To some degree or another, this is something that we deal with. Gaps. Every single day. Every single day. These are things that we deal with. What we do with that is our decision. Whether we climb that ladder and we acknowledge that it's a reality, this is we can't change this is what it is, and we keep climbing to say, all right, we've got a problem here, let's take care of this. And we start to find solutions, and then we make it happen. We climb the ladder. We exemplify that type of attitude to everyone around us, or we put on our victim lenses and we go down the ladder. I'll just wait and hope this is going to kind of work itself out. We'll just see. Let's just wait for a while. And then we get into words like, I can't. And we handicap ourselves. And then we start up with our excuses. Not 100, 0. We switch to 0, 100. And then we begin, that's right, it's not my fault. And then we begin to blame others. And I would imagine that we've all seen people go up the ladder and down the ladder. We've all, if we are honest about ourselves, have seen ourselves go up the ladder and down the ladder. I challenge you today to think about your role as an everyday leader in accountability. Hold yourself accountable for climbing the ladder, and hold yourself accountable for caring about others in holding them accountable. I'm going to leave you with this one challenge. Care about others, invest in others, practice 100, 0 every single day. Every day. Years ago, I think Roger mentioned that one of the things that I get a chance to do is to do some planning with organizations, setting direction with organizations. And 25 years ago, I got an opportunity to work with a very rapidly growing church. And as they were sitting down and having conversations about the direction of the church and what they believed and some of the core values and core principles and the foundations of things that were going to be the basis of their direction setting, I will always remember sitting in this little humble living room in Cincinnati, Ohio, and one of those people saying, one of the things that I really believe is that I believe that little things done with great love can change the world. That's not just a statement that exists in churches. That's a statement that every single day that we can embrace in our families, in our teams, in our workplaces, that by caring about others and not focusing on the massive things that need to be done, but the little things, every single day can change the world. Thank you guys very much for allowing me to come in and chat with you today. And I hope that it challenges you a little bit to leave here today and think about what it means to care every single day and be an everyday leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kent.